energy in America, because I think that we have been blocked from the change that America needs in this area in a really serious way. When you look at what's happened with gas prices, we're 4% of the world's population, putting out 25% of the world's greenhouse gases. We're the worst polluter on the planet. We're in competition with China right now for that wonderful status. But the truth is, we need to be leading the way. And we're going to have to take on the oil companies, gas companies, etc., in order to do that. Now, here's what I think we need to do. I think we should be capping carbon emissions in America, a national cap. I think that cap should be ratcheted down every year. We ought to reduce our greenhouse gases by at least 80% by the year 2050. And I will tell you, I'm open to a more aggressive plan than that, but that's the minimum we ought to be doing. I believe, ought to make the polluters pay. That means that people who are emitting carbon dioxide below the cap, they ought to be required to get a permit. They ought to participate in an auction to get that permit, and the proceeds of that auction process, which should generate between $30 and $40 billion, a big chunk of that, at least $13 billion, ought to go to transforming the way we do energy in America. Wind, solar, cellulose-based biofuels. Let me see. There is a difference between my candidacy and just to be blunt about it, my two major rivals for the nomination. I do not believe we need more nuclear power plants. I am not in favor of more nuclear power plants. And I am not for liquid coal. I think the last thing we need is another carbon-based fuel. I do think, and by the way, I'd go further than that. I think we ought to have a moratorium. We ought to have a ban on building any more coal-fired power plants unless we actually have the capacity to capture the carbon, which we do not have today and don't appear to be very close to having. I think we ought to put $1 billion into making sure that America's building and using the most innovative fuel-efficient vehicles on the planet, that we're building them here in America with union workers, that they're not being built somewhere else. I mean, things like these plug-in hybrids have extraordinary potential. And then finally, and this goes to a message that you won't hear very often, but it's important to me. You know, I believe it's time for the President to ask Americans to be patriotic about something other than war. To say to America, if we really want to change this country, we're going to have to do it together. All of us together. I wish you all have been through this so many times. Presidential candidates come rolling through here every 4 years, promising this and that and this and that. Vote for me, I'll go to Washington, and I'll change the world. It's just not the truth. It's a fantasy, and all of you know it's a fantasy. I mean, the change that this country needs to have is going to require you. And I know you're not supposed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Sacrifice. We are all going to have to be willing to sacrifice for this country. We're all going to have to be willing to take responsibility for America. It's that simple. And this is one of the great examples, this area of energy, global warming, and conservation. We cannot spend and innovate our way out of this problem. We're going to have to conserve in our homes, in our workplaces, driving more fuel-efficient vehicles. Now, I believe the fuel efficiency standard should be at least 40 miles to the gallon by the year 2016. But we have to drive more fuel-efficient vehicles. We have to do this together. We can't change this country if we don't do it together. And I think back about the great movements that really changed America. I'm not talking about just replacing a Democratic administration, a Republican administration with a Democratic administration. Lord knows we need that. But beyond that, if we want to see fundamental change, a change in the way Washington operates, a change in all these things that I've just talked about in the last few minutes, the truth of the matter is those movements largely did not begin in the Oval Office. The great movements I've seen in my lifetime, I grew up with the Civil Rights Movement. I know where it started. It started in communities just like this, where people had some backbone and courage, and they went out and spoke up and marched and changed America. Same thing happened in ending the war in Vietnam. I feel the same thing happening right now about this war in Iraq. But to change the country, we need you. We need you to take responsibility for yourself and your family, but we also need to take responsibility for America. It is the only way, to paraphrase Gandhi, we have to be the change we believe in. All of us together. Because that's where the power is in America. That's where it is. That's the reason these movements have to start in places and communities just like Keene. So I'm very glad to be with all of you today. I obviously haven't talked